Got here this morning that on week 17 I had forgotten my regular notepad, and so I had to use a different one, which is still at home. So I had to go back and skim through the class to kind of refresh what I remembered about that, because it was a somewhat unusual discussion or interesting discussion talking about this idea where Paul talks about all Israel being saved. One thing I will say, because I know some of you might want to talk about this, is one of the last things that, the last thing that Ashby Camp began to discuss last week was this issue of the of how we interact with each other as brothers and dealing with those who are weak and some of that kind of stuff. He only got about halfway through that discussion, and so I'd like to hold off on that discussion or talking about that until our next discussion session, because he's got a lot more to say. And so this coming week's video will have a lot more about that, as well as some other stuff that I think is particularly, it's worth talking about. And so rather than trying to integrate that today, I would rather wait until the next time we have a discussion. I would not be opposed to watching the next video and then having another discussion immediately after, because that particular topic is one that we struggle with in application in the church. And it's not just our church, it's all churches, and even churches that have strong central authority, which is certainly not a characteristic of the churches of Christ, struggle with this issue of how do we treat each other, what does it mean to be a weaker Christian or a stronger Christian, how do we deal with situations where some people are saying we don't want to do this and everybody else is saying we do want to do this, or vice versa. So these are really important questions, and I do want to explore them, but I don't think today's the time, since we are only halfway through that discussion in terms of what we've been watching. So if we can wait until later to do that one, there's lots of other stuff we can talk about today. So let me sort of throw this open and see what somebody would like to talk about, or if not, I have some prompts as usual that I can work with. Everybody's looking at their notes. You're all looking at my students on the day of the quiz and the test going, oh, I know there's something he told us that's important, I better go check and see what it was. Go ahead.
I was just thinking about, to me, Romans 12 is one of the chapters that we all ought to memorize. It is such a whole description on how we should be living our lives. The first idea that he puts out is to love one another, the loving. And then there is some commentaries think that everything after that verse is explaining what love is. And then others say, well, they're each individual things. But I think either way, it's still how we are to live our life as a Christian. To me, Romans 12 is a real important letter that Paul has written to us today.
And I would tend to ascribe to, maybe not in the sense of that everything he said after that is expounding on that, but I would say everything except the very end of the book, where he's kind of doing some personal greetings and stuff, it certainly flows out of that. It may or may not be where he's trying to say this is what it means, but it all sort of flows from that. And so that notion in chapter 12, if you look in verses 1 through 2 or 3, he says, therefore I urge you, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual act of worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, which is good and acceptable and perfect. And then he goes on and starts talking about how we love each other, and how we relate to the members of the church and stuff like that. Jerry, you're specifically, what passage were you looking at? Because it's not right in front of me.
Let me find it here. 9. Let love be without hypocrisy.
Okay, yeah. And I saw that. I wasn't sure because it's a little bit further down. But when he says let love be without hypocrisy, I think that informs so much of what he's going to say after that when it comes to how we interact with each other. Because that love and hypocrisy, we don't normally think of those things as going hand in hand. So why does he feel the need to tell people that love should be without hypocrisy?
Well, too often people talk about loving you or that kind of thing, but their actions don't fulfill that comment. I think that's the point that he's making, is that we can't be false in saying love. that it is a basic requirement. And it goes, when you look at Christ's comment about loving God is number one and loving your neighbor as yourself. And he doesn't say it can't be hypocritical, but it's obviously involved in his comment. It can't be a fake love. And so many people today, well, there's a song that fits this description. It says, I'd rather be fishing thinking about God than in church thinking about fishing. And that to me is an idea of the hypocritical idea of love.
Okay. And I would say, I'll come to you just a second, Ian, because I would say when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, the as yourself is the without hypocrisy kind of a thing. Because if you're loving your neighbor as you love yourself, you're not going to be doing hypocritically unless you have a very weird relationship with yourself.
Sometimes I don't like myself.
And that's true, but rarely do we, even people who do bad things to themselves usually do it for self-motivated reasons. People who try to commit suicide, people who engage in narcotics use or whatever, they don't do that and say to themselves, I mean, they do sometimes say to themselves, this is a bad idea, I shouldn't do this. But at the same time, they're doing it because they want to do it. They're doing it to fulfill something inside of them. And so even there, where they may not be happy about what they're doing, they're still motivated by their self-interest. And so when we turn that and apply that to someone else, doing, love your neighbor as yourself, the idea would be that we're looking for their interest, hopefully with maybe a little more clarity than we look for our own sometimes. Yeah.
Well, to me, verse 9 and the following couple kind of speak to not being the Sunday morning Christian, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't, it's just as far as like the body of believers in that context for your brothers and sisters. You can't just love people, on Sunday morning and then curse their name on Monday morning.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what the whole the ESV here says. It doesn't have hypocrisy. It uses the word genuine. It says let love be genuine, and you can't genuinely love someone sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what that verse is telling me.
What was that word?
Genuine. Genuine.
Okay.
Yeah.
My version says sincere.
Sincerity. Okay. Genuine, sincere, without hypocrisy. What you say is, and what you see is what you get, is kind of what we're talking about. It's not, and it's consistently that way. My students, we have to do a social contract in all of my classes, and they've all learned that there are certain words that are supposed to be on the social contract, so I try very hard to not let them put those words on there to make them think a little harder. But one of the words that they always want to have on there, and it's a good word, is integrity. And the idea behind integrity, every student that I have, because they've done social contracts every year in every class for 12 years, which means they've done probably 60 or 70 of them in most cases, they know what integrity is. Integrity, and everyone will tell you, it's doing the right thing when nobody's looking. That notion that nobody's watching you. Well, love isn't necessarily when nobody's looking, because by its very nature, it's doing things for people. But it's doing the right thing even when there's nobody there to hold you accountable. Even when the person that you're loving isn't really a loving kind of a person, the kind of person that you want to love. It's doing the right thing when it's difficult is maybe the critical element when it comes to love in that respect. So, David.
Whenever I've read it, I've always had a different interpretation. This is a good conversation, but I've always taken it as he's just basing hypocritical love would be like, okay, you have to love Gentiles, Israelites, whatever you want, like you can't just say, oh, I love them because they're Christians, but not them because they're not.
Okay, so you mean like you have to, the idea of loving not just people who are in the body, but people who are outside the body as well.
Yes.
And an expectation that you don't just love your own.
Correct.
That's kind of what Jesus talks about that. Don't just love your friends, you love your enemies as well. So I think I think it does encompass all of that. That true love for humans means loving even the ones that aren't doing what you want them to do. Now that doesn't lead to the same response as the love that we have for someone who's part of the body who is doing what they're supposed to do, does it? No, how would our response vary? If we love those in the world and we care about those who are in the world, how would our response to them vary from the way that we might respond to members of the church who are living righteous lives? Doesn't just have to be David on this one. I'm just throwing this up.
I mean, it's similar, like the old analogy, right? Love the sinner, not the sin.
Okay.
I mean, I know it's an old used up saying, but.
Okay, so we can love people and not approve of what they do.
Correct.
And we can make it clear that we don't approve of what they do while also making clear that we love them. You can't do that by going around and you know, insulting them and being, you know, deliberately aggressive towards them. There's a difference between sharing the gospel and sharing God's will and doing things that are designed to basically antagonize people. I think of the Westboro Baptist Church. How many of you are familiar with the Westboro? A few of you are, okay? So what are they best known for?
They're
God
best
hates
known
queers.
for
What's that?
God hates queers.
Okay, good. Well, that is exactly right, but in what context? Because they go beyond that.
Oh, they don't like the military, they don't like anybody.
Okay, so how do they bring attention to themselves?
Protesting,
What?
funerals
Okay.
for soldiers.
Okay, which if you want to anger a lot of Americans, that's a quick way to do it, right? I mean, it's kind of the religious equivalent of Colin Kaepernick's "Let's Kneel" when the national anthem is being played. The problem I had with what Kaepernick was doing, I didn't like the fact that he was kneeling, but the problem I had with him, because protest by its nature is designed to bring attention and in many ways to make us uncomfortable or upset. That's the point of protest. But the problem with Kaepernick was he acted like he was surprised that everybody was upset about it. Well, you knew you were protesting, but and the Westboro Baptist Church, in fairness to them, they know they're going to upset everybody. But nothing about what they're doing is designed to spread the gospel or to change anybody's thinking. It's only designed to bring attention to them and to make people upset. And that's not what Christians do when it comes to sharing God's will. Because if all you do is share God's will in a way that makes people upset, have you done anything to spread the kingdom? No. All you've done is make people dislike you and dislike the name of your master, and that's not a good thing. Steve?
There's a lot of important points in chapter 12, among others. Romans is a great book, but verse 3 is very important too. It says, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought. And that's important, and I think that leads to a lot of issues if you do think more highly of yourself than you should. You position yourself above others or equal to God or the judge of others. You're going to be hypocritical, judgmental. You're going to have a hard time loving. You're going to have a hard time doing all the other things that he's asking you to do here, to show mercy and to be part of the body, to not be conformed to the world, all these things, because you're just too uppity. You are. And so
That's the word I want to see in the scriptures somewhere.
The new translation.
That's right, the New Life Translation. But I think that's such a good point because it isn't just, I think in this context, he may be referencing that with a slightly more specific focus, but everything that happened that he talks about after this, in part comes out of having humility. Really loving your brother, you have to have humility to put somebody else's interest ahead of your own, because why would you ever do it otherwise unless somebody's paying you to? I guess, I mean, maybe then, that's what a lot, working at a restaurant, that's kind of the nature of it. You get paid to put other people's interest ahead of your own, but you get paid for it. It's a job. We're not getting paid, at least not in the traditional sense. There's a reward, but it's not built around the idea of you do this and you get rewarded. It's built around the idea of this is the right thing to do. And so humility is a necessity, and it affects everything about our interaction with other people. And it's a challenge for most of us, me, for sure.
Well, how can we influence others if we don't love them?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think we've all heard of those congregations where they want you to date within the congregation and you don't find anybody out. The world, well, if that were true, I wouldn't be married to Steve. And we wouldn't have the family we have. So you can't influence people if you aren't out there, like David said. You can't do it, like Steve said, if you don't have humility.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have love and sincerity, how are you going to connect with people? And we're told to do that.
Yeah. And I think, so two observations. One is that Paul says you're supposed to be of the world, not in the world, but I didn't mean by that leave the world, because if you leave the world, you're no good. You're a monk in a monastery, And I suppose there's a place for that, at the time when they needed people to write some books, but that's about it, That doesn't really help us any. So he says you're supposed to be in the world in the sense of interacting with the world, because that's how you spread the gospel. But then the other aspect of this is this idea of interacting with people with a mindset towards bringing them to the gospel. And I think, unfortunately, and we're moving past this. I don't think it's fair to say that we're still stuck in this mindset. The challenge now is is figuring out how to make use of what we've come to realize. But I think for a long time, the Church of Christ was stuck in a way of thinking that was a very late 18th century, early 19th century way of thinking, which is since everybody, but not everybody, but the vast majority of people in America are Christians, then all you really have to do is to show them why our version of Christianity is better than their version of Christianity, and they'll come join us. And so public debates and, figuring out what's wrong with what the Baptists teach so we can go tell the Baptists that they're wrong and we can convert them to Christianity. I don't know that ever was particularly effective. It worked some, but you're as likely to antagonize people because you're attacking what they believe when you do that. But it did work some. The public debates worked because the people who came didn't have anything else to do. It wasn't like there was any movies or mini golf or anything like that, so they had nothing better to do. And they got there and they listened, and some people were persuaded. But that was because at the time we were a nation that was, number one, significantly religiously and Christian religiously oriented. So the vast majority of Americans were at least gave lip service to the idea of being Christian and going to church and being a part of something. And secondly, it worked because we were at least trying to be a relatively rational society. The end of the 1800s, the early 1900s are where you start to see a lot of concepts about integrating scientific thinking into moral thinking and different things like that. And so we're trying to be a rational society, and so if you're making rational arguments to rational people, sometimes you can persuade them to your way of thinking. But we don't live in that world anymore. We don't live in that world, first of all, because we are not in any way a nation in which the overwhelming majority of people even identify as Christian, much less actually practice Christianity. We are not, by and large, a country in which the majority of people are interested in a rational discussion of anything, but certainly not their religion. Religion and politics are the two most dangerous things to start talking about in public because people are not rational about those things. And so to expect that we are going to be able to do things that way, to get up and make a compelling argument based on logic and evidence and facts, and I can do all that, but to think that that's really going to change the hearts and minds of most people is foolish. So we integrate that, but we much more focus on reaching people where they are, finding connections with them, and demonstrating that, demonstrating our concern for them, and demonstrating how God has changed our lives. And the success that I've had, and which hasn't been a huge amount, but the success that I've had in converting people has always come through that. At least since I've been an adult on my own anyway. It's always come through that, because that is how people respond today. And you can't do that unless you can show them some genuine, or fake it really well, I guess. But one way or the other, they need to believe that you care about them. And if they don't, they're not going to care, because why would they? Mark?
I was going to say, that's where I think he's talking about that genuine love. You've got to be in those people's lives and actually say, I care about you. And it's not just, forcing something that they don't understand or won't. It's more of that, I got to be part of your life and what you're interested in too. Just like Paul said, I am a certain thing to certain people to reach those people. And it was, that's what he did. And we've got to think the same way sometimes. Yeah. We've got to put ourselves into their lives. What are they interested in so we can show them we are interested in them, And I think that's the hardest thing to do, and to show that, to get them to change,
Yeah.
And most people say, why do I need to change? I'm
happy the way I am, right? Yeah. I'm good the way I am. Everybody loves me, And if you find the right preacher, they can preach you into heaven after you die. I overheard that conversation earlier, They'll say nice things about you and everybody will feel good and, everything's great, right? But it's a lie. Okay, I think I saw David and then I'll come forward to Ian.
I just, with what Mark was saying and everything talking, this is a struggle that I have as a Christian, is for me, spreading the gospel, I kind of pick soft targets, if you will, and that's a fault of mine. But like, somebody, if they have an approach, you can hear they want to listen, so it's like I spread it and I reach out to them. But like to ask me to go in front of a mosque as they're coming out and try to do it, I mean, both are the right approach, right? But one could be interpreted as antagonistic. So is that, that approach, it's hard when somebody is so steadfast in what maybe they believe. So I feel bad sometimes personally that I'm too scared to take on the hard challenge, if you will, because I feel like if I could take soft targets and maybe talk 3 into it, it's better than working on one forever.
I would, from the standpoint of maybe make you feel a little better, or perhaps, I don't know. But anyway, I would say this. I think, when I think of, I've never used the phrase soft and hard targets before, but I think that's actually a really good phrase. It kind of sounds like we're going to bomb them, but I think, to me, the hard targets that are legitimate targets are not trying to go get a bunch of people come out of the mosque, because they're not in a place where that's going to be meaningful. The hard targets are when we interact with people and either they do have a faith that is contradictory to Christianity and we're trying to work with them through that individually, or more so, we encounter those people who are so deeply messed up that they really need God, and they kind of maybe even have an awareness of it, but you can see that you're going to get sucked into a really time-consuming, possibly fund-consuming process to try to reclaim them from what they're in. To me, I would rather go stand in front of a mosque and preach than I would deal with that, because that is, at the end of the day, I'm gonna stand in front of the mosque for 2 hours, nobody's gonna listen to me, and I'm gonna go home. If I start putting my time and energy into somebody who is really broken like that, it's gonna be for a long time. So to me, that's the harder thing, is that kind of a thing, not going and doing something, the gesture like that, It's kind of, I forget where I read this kind of this definition of heroism. We think of heroism, thanks to Hollywood, as this big grand gesture that saves everybody. But the reality is that heroism most of the time is doing hard things over and over again that are not particularly noteworthy, that are not particularly attention-grabbing, that there's not any accolades that you get for it. And I think that's the more difficult one, and it's the one that I understand we're all reluctant to do it, because it can be exhausting, and it can be, sometimes it doesn't work, and then you've put a bunch of time and energy into someone that, you don't get anything out of it. Or if you look at it in those terms, that definitely is how it looks like. So, Ian.
A couple of points. Just talking about soft versus hard targets, it doesn't really matter in the scheme of things, because one soul is not more valuable than another, right? So the low-hanging fruit has the same value as the hard target, and so there's that to consider. But this is all making me think of something. So when we used to worship in Houston, Texas, it seems like the Church of Christ has a real bad habit of pointing out one thing and harping on it. Right? As a church, we're kind of like really good at picking out homosexuality and just harping on it until the nth degree, but we don't mention promiscuity on the hetero side,
right,
which we need to. But one of the elders there was teaching a class that where this topic was coming up. How do we spread the gospel? And you spread it out of love. You teach them Jesus first. Right? Mm-hmm. And everything's going to come after that. Once they see who Jesus is, they see the love that he has, then we can work on the nitty-gritty stuff. The details, yeah. Right? So if we teach them the love of God, the love of Jesus, and the fact that we are all one body and that we are all one loving body, then we can work on the rules afterwards.
If that's true, and that's the tricky part, is we can teach them that, but if they come in and they see it and they look at it, they're like, well, that's not how they are at all, then all that did is undermine our message.
Right, but my point was, we as Christians, we often overcomplicate things, right, and we pull out our bullhorn, step on our soapbox, and tell the world what they're doing wrong. You ain't going to catch any flies like that.
Yeah.
And so we need to teach love first. That needs to be our first priority.
Paul says to the Corinthians, I didn't come to you with complicated arguments and big speeches. I came and I preached Christ crucified, and that was it. That was after Athens, and he made some big arguments and nobody cared. Mm-hmm. So he refocused on the gospel itself. Karen.
For David and myself, I lean on this a lot. 1 Corinthians 3 and 6 says, Paul planted, Apollos watered, but God gives the increase.
Yeah. And a lot of times we're not going to be able to see the effects of what we do. Sometimes we do, and that's great what we do. Sometimes, sometimes we come across somebody and it's like super easy, and we're like, wow, look what I did, and what we don't realize is somebody else did a whole bunch of stuff before us, you know? And so it kind of works both ways in some cases, but the reality is that we will never know our impact in this world, in this life, until after this life is over. We just won't. Maybe we won't even know it then, maybe we won't care at that point, I don't know, but we will never fully know our impact, for good or for bad. We're never going to know how many positive things we did, how many people we did, because sometimes people don't respond in the moment, or sometimes you do something nice and it really makes a difference, but it takes them a long time to figure out that happened. Sometimes people just don't get around to coming back and saying thank you, whatever. The flip side to it is true as well. So before we get too, thinking too highly of ourselves, we also do things without thinking about it that hurt people, and maybe they never tell us. Maybe it just kind of passes by. Maybe we do more damage than we realize. I've come to learn or understand how much damage I can do with sort of incidental thoughts or incidental things that I say as I'm going along, and trying hard to do less of that, but it still comes out sometimes because of a variety of things. But my background in training and in law and some of that, and just that I've always been able, whether I meant to or not, to figure out what people's weak spots were. Sometimes that still comes through, even when I don't mean for it to. And so we do damage, we do good, we'll never know all of that. And maybe it's just as well, because our job is to just keep working day by day. Buck.
I'm going to say this, I hope I do say it the right way, but it seems like there's a thin line there between loving your neighbor and them taking advantage of that love.
Yes, there is. And I don't know that we can always be on the correct side of that line.
How would you handle, just come out and tell them, or just kind of fade out into the sunset without being a hypocrite?
Well, I think, and this gets to a really interesting point, because I think in my experience, and I don't know that this is true for everybody by any means, but I think part of it is, if you're going to be genuine, you can't have an agenda that somebody doesn't know about. I think there's nothing wrong with having an agenda if people know that that's what's happening. So, when a politician is campaigning, everybody knows they're trying to get your vote. So the things that they say, the things that they do, they understand at least part of that is because they're trying to get your vote. Now, that doesn't mean that we expect them to be lying to us about who they are and what they intend to do, but we also know that they're focused, but their first goal in the campaign is usually to win the election. And as long as everybody knows that going into it, then nobody can claim, oh, I was deceived. I thought he was my best friend because he kept saying nice things to me. Well, you knew he was campaigning, right? What did you think was going on? So when we're honest about what our motives are, I think it makes it easier to be genuine, and then to be able to say to someone that we are working with, I feel like you're taking advantage. This is the thing, is we don't like having these conversations, and I totally get it. But there are times when we have to say to someone, look, I do care about you. I am concerned about you, but I'm concerned about you in the same context I am everyone, which is I'm trying to spread the gospel and trying to save your soul, because your soul is valuable to God and to me. And I feel like you're taking advantage of that by doing what you're doing. And so we're either going to have to rethink how we're doing this, or I'm going to have to start spreading or putting more of my effort somewhere else. And I don't think there's anything disingenuous about that, as long as you were upfront with him in the first place, that this is my biggest concern, is spreading the gospel. And very rarely, number one, do we feel that way. Me as included, very often I don't stop and think, is my biggest concern really spreading the gospel, or is it making sure I don't lose my job, or is it, whatever else it might be. But if that's true, and that comes through, I still think of this friend I had in college. He was one of the people that went on the Vienna Studies program with me as a senior. I was a senior, I think he was a junior. His reason, a lot of us went on the Vienna Studies program. We were able to get money from churches to go, because we were going to be doing some Bible, English, teaching English to foreign language students using the Bible. And so that was a basis, part of what we were doing. He went on the Vienna Studies program to spread the gospel to Europe. He did not go there to see the sights of Europe, to go to experience the culture. He went there to spread the gospel, which at the time I thought was ridiculous, because, you're in Europe for the first time ever. But to him, that was all he wanted to do. That was what he cared about. And every interaction he had began with that. No one could ever claim that he was false about what he was trying to do when he was interacting with them. And that can be uncomfortable sometimes, but if our life is centered around the gospel, then people know that what we're doing for them, we're doing it because that's what Christ wants us to do. It's not that we're doing it because it's what we think is, it's what maybe would not be our first natural inclination or something like that. It's what Christ wants, and we love them because it's what Christ wants and because it's what we're called to do, and we can love them without hypocrisy and still say the reason I'm doing this is because my master told me to. I think if we begin relationships early in the relationship by explaining what our priorities are, it makes it a lot easier for us to say to someone who's taking advantage of us, who we think is headed down that road, we're not going to do this. This is not what this relationship is about. It's kind of a more extreme version of this would be a relationship between a woman and a man where they're dating and the man is routinely saying cruel things to the woman, or the man is routinely hitting on other women as this is going along. And at some point, I would hope very early on, the woman in that relationship would say, okay, this is not what this is about. I'm in this relationship because I want me to be your main focus, and clearly that's not what's happening here. So if you can't change your behavior, then this is not going to continue because that's not what this relationship is. It's not just you being able to do whatever you want to do. So I think we have to find a way to make it clear that while we do genuinely care about people, that care is informed first and foremost by the fact that we love God before we love anything else. I think Mark, did you have your hand up? I know Jerry does. Okay, Jerry, go ahead.
Just to be, I guess, careful in the comments that you're making. Paul, in about 1 Corinthians 9, somewhere along there, talks about suing your brother. And in his
He's opposed to it, for those of you who don't know. Go ahead, sorry.
His comment, to sum it up, was, why not just forget it? I mean, and so he took advantage of you. What difference does it make? And that's what we got to be careful of. We can't alienate that other person because they're taking advantage of you. Sometimes that is something we have to live with. I'm not opposed. I'm saying the comments are wrong. I just say we have to look at maybe a bigger picture of what the concern is.
And that's a good point. I think we can integrate both of those concepts together. Yeah. Certainly when we're talking about our brothers, our standard for, basically saying, okay, we're just going to let that go, maybe a little different than our standard with the world, because in the brotherhood at least, if a brother hurts you, sorry, I hate it when I don't finish my sentences. So, the default, if we see a brother who's sinning, is what?
So we're supposed to tell them.
We're supposed to tell them. We're supposed to, if necessary, kind of stage an intervention to try to get them back on track. So one would assume, and that's if they're doing an ongoing sin. Somebody stumbles, once. Our job at that point is not to have an intervention with them. It might be to quick checkup. That wasn't a good thing to do. Yeah, okay, so move on. But what Paul is talking about when he says, when somebody's sinning or stumbling this is someone who is falling down and they're headed the wrong direction, or they're headed the wrong direction. We need to get them back on track. So in that context, if someone were to take advantage of us and continue to take advantage of us, now we have a problem that we have to do something about, because the problem isn't that we're being taken advantage of. What's the problem if somebody is continually taking advantage of us, sinning against us by doing that? What's the real problem there?
You're wasting your time at some point, right? Where you could be...
That is a problem, but that's not the real problem. What's the real problem if brother is taking advantage of us in a sinful way and they're continuing to do it?
He's
Then they're not going to listen to you.
He should be.
You're on the right track. But
You're
let's
allowing
just
it
down.
almost.
You're allowing him to do what?
To sin.
To sin. There we go. Okay, so now the problem is, if this is an ongoing behavior, we have a duty as Christians to say, okay, what you're doing is wrong and you need to stop. Not because you're taking advantage of me in the sense that I don't want to help you, or not in the sense that I'm losing money, but in the sense that what you're doing is causing you to sin, or it is a form of sin and you've got to stop. So our job at that point would be to intervene. So when Paul is saying, why not just be taken advantage of, clearly he's not talking about someone who is engaging in an ongoing pattern of sinful behavior, because that would not be his response to that. His response would be deal with the sin, as it is in 1 Corinthians elsewhere. So that would suggest a brother who does, slips occasionally and takes advantage of someone, or does something that disadvantages you, and we might in other circumstances take them to court for, something like that. So in that context, with a brother, it's easy enough to say, or not easy enough, but it's certainly possible to say, okay, that was a one-time thing, we're just going to let it go. We're not going to turn it into a big thing, I'm not going to take it to the elders to fight over it or whatever, we're just going to let it go. That could also be true with individuals who are not in the church, where there's, even more likely they're going to occasionally do things that are sinful towards us, or harmful towards us, or whatever, and we just let it go. What I'm really referring to is more of where you have an ongoing pattern where someone is taking advantage of you, and their purpose in having the relationship is more about taking advantage of you than any sort of genuine concern about who you are, what you're trying to teach, any of that kind of stuff. Someone like that is generally not a good use of our continued resources, because they're not simply in need of help, they are deliberately and consistently taking advantage of that help in a cynical and manipulative way. And that's no longer a relationship that is someone who falls into a pattern of being enabled by continuing to take and continue to take. The more you do for them, what are you doing?
Enabling.
You're enabling, and what is that causing them to then, what pattern does that set up in their mind if you enable them to take?
Positive feedback.
It's positive feedback for negative behavior, right? So the more you enable that, the worse it gets. It doesn't improve by showing them more and more compassion, giving them more and more stuff. It only improves if you do something to make clear that that behavior is wrong. A brother who stumbles and we just let it go, assuming that they're generally on the right path, is going to self-correct through following the gospel and get back on track. It's only if they get off where they start, they get into that pattern, they start to do the same thing. That's when we have to step in and say, okay, we've got to stop rewarding negative behavior, and we've got to change how we approach this. Steve?
The love without hypocrisy, I think, falls into this. On the list over here of the Corinthian list of love that defines, it's not completely inclusive, but it's limited. I don't know if you realize love is limited. It does not enable.
Right.
Okay, that's a limit of love, but a lot of times we enable thinking it is love. It's not love at all.
Yeah.
And so you could put a lot of things in that. If you don't tell the truth about something, rejoices with the truth. If you don't exercise that, then it's not love to keep that from someone.
Yeah.
So love has limits confined to what God defines love to be. And we expand that into just almost this passive lifestyle.
Do whatever they want.
Let people be. Let them do whatever they want, and I'll enable them, and God will love me for it.
And I think, to that point, I think when you look at love is one of those absolutes. It's kind of, in a sense, like God. I don't mean, well, God is love, so I suppose actually I'm on really good ground saying that. God is not limited by rules or by limitations of power or knowledge or understanding, but God is limited by his nature. So God will not, by his nature, do certain things. If Paul says it's impossible for God to sin, for example. So because by God's nature he is the definition of righteousness and justice, he can't sin. It would be contrary to his nature. And so love is kind of like that too. There's things that are contrary to the very nature of love that limit it, not because love is not because love can't overcome and all that different stuff, but because, yeah, something that love doesn't do is this, And Paul even says something that is not self-serving. That is a limitation of love. Love isn't self-serving, okay? It doesn't mean that love is limited. It means that that's just not part of what it is. So you can exclude certain things. And absolutely, love is not enabling. Love is not doing whatever somebody else wants, no matter how destructive it would be for them. That would be the equivalent of watching your small child reach up from a hot stove and going, well, he'll figure it out for himself, and it's better that way, because that's what he wants to do. You know, we stop people from, you know, getting run over by trains and from, you know, doing wildly stupid things or wildly reckless and dangerous things because we're concerned about them. And in doing that, we may limit their freedom and their opportunity to do something that they wanted to do, but we're doing it for their best interests. And so love is not always just doing what somebody else wants. It's about doing what is best for them. Just as we, and here again, you know, when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, he's talking to people who are trying to be spiritually healthy. There are people listening, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, that are not spiritually healthy. And they could read what he said and say, well, that means this. But for people who are spiritually healthy, what it means to love your neighbor as yourself is, I have a healthy relationship with God, and I know what my role is, and I know what God wants for me, and therefore I know what I would want somebody else to have as well. And I'm going to behave in that way, consistent with that kind of behavior. All right, one last thought. We're about out of time. Oh, sorry. Sarah, you have a thought.
I was just going to say, I think Jesus was love, right? But it's where he drew the source from. God, he drew it from God. He saw it through the lens of God. And that meant saying the hard things. It meant saying the loving things. And sometimes it meant flipping the tables. So Jesus brought the message to those who thought they already had it all under control. And he did it in a way that they would understand because he loved God the most.
And I think, and I want to, so if you think about the times that Jesus got angry, and there are times that Jesus said really harsh things, not very often, but he did. Every single time there is one unifying characteristic behind the people that he said those things to. Anybody want to guess what that is or know what that is?
Pharisees.
Okay, but they're not the only ones. The overturning the tables, those weren't Pharisees. What was it that upset him? What set him off every time?
They knew better.
Hypocrisy. Yeah. Sometimes they did know better. I'm not sure the merchants in the temple necessarily, but hypocrisy every time. When he goes off on the Pharisees in Matthew 20, it's the 7 was, I think it's 20, right? I mean, he goes off on the Pharisees. It's all about hypocrisy. When he flips over the tables in the temple, it's because of the hypocrisy of bringing into a place of worship, bringing this, it's not just merchandism, it's not just selling things, it's overcharging people who have no other right recourse but to buy it from you. It's the hypocrisy of saying, we're all about faith and religion and God and love, but let's make some money off of it. That's what matters. Hypocrisy is what upset him every time. And the thing that's interesting is, you know, we talk about that all of us, to some extent, have a little bit of what I would call the spark of the divine in us, a little bit of God's, not God's personality exactly, but we have an awareness of what's right and wrong. There are a few things that irritate most of us more than people that we see being hypocritical, right? It frustrates us, it angers us when people say one thing and do. I would rather somebody were mean to my face and were exactly consistent with that than somebody says really nice things to me and then is going around stabbing me in the back, you know? I would rather just know where you are and deal with you where you are than I would you pretending to be something else. And so hypocrisy is what upsets Jesus more than anything else. So to that point, real quickly, how many of you have seen the movie Groundhog Day? Okay, a lot of hands, so I am going to continue with this. So one of the cool things about Groundhog Day, it's a fascinating movie for no other reason than because it is one of the few movies that never makes any effort to explain why it happened. Most movies feel like they have to show you why did this weird thing happen, and the Groundhog Day is like, we don't care. We're just going to tell a story. But what's fascinating to me in Groundhog Day is that after the main character begins to realize, Phil begins to realize that he's caught in this loop of time, the day keeps repeating. Initially, at least, he does some really, just kind of testing it out and doing crazy things. Then he decides to try to develop a relationship with this woman that is his producer. And what he does is he learns a bunch of skills that are designed to impress her and make her fall for him and everything else, and it almost works. He creates this almost perfect night, and it just kind of falls apart right at the very end. And so then he starts to go back and tries to recreate that over and over and over again, and it just gets worse and worse and worse, and then he gets into the cycle of self-destruction. But eventually, after this just goes, and we don't know how, it may have gone on a really long time, but at some point, he changes his approach. And his approach becomes, let's just be nice to people for the sake of me. I got nothing else to do. I'm going to try to make everybody else have the perfect day. And that's his entire focus. And it ranges from being nice to the insurance salesman, to trying to save the bum on the street who's dying, to just being, just everywhere, at every moment. He figures out every wrong thing that's happening in somebody's life that day, and he's there to fix it. Saving people's lives and fixing people's tires, and none of it is about him. It's completely about trying to fix everything for everybody else. And it's at that point that, first of all, everybody in the town loves him by the time we get to that final day. And second of all, that's when the woman actually falls for him, because now he really does care about everybody else, and she wants to know why he's like that. And I think that's the key to us in understanding the genuine nature of love. He almost got her to fall for him very early in the movie by simply manipulating everything to look like he was the perfect guy. But that wasn't real. It wasn't until he actually became a person who cared about everybody and wanted to do good things and was focused on what everybody else needed that she saw him as somebody who was really worthwhile. And that's what God is looking for from us. Not love that impresses people, that does all the right things and checks all the boxes and everybody says, wow, what a great guy Ryan is. But love that's actually genuine, that is focused on everybody else's needs and doing what's best, even when that doesn't necessarily mean doing what's best for us or what we would most like to do. We know on one level, the big picture level, it is what's best for us. But doing that and that kind of thinking is challenging for us because it is a constant commitment. And that's the thing, if you think about that one day, Phil does everything that one day to help everybody else out, and that would be exhausting. And yet that's what he does, and that's why it works. All right, that's it for us. It's an odd place to end, I know, but next week we will pick up with the next video.